And then for health, I would say my top one is usually always greens. Add in green smoothies, add in green juice, just eat fresh, eat a lot of fresh food. It significantly changes how you feel, especially around greens, and a diverse range of greens. So not just eating one type of lettuce, eat herbs, eat wild greens, grow sprouts, grow microgreens. Like there's a lot of ways of making it easy to add in fresh, nutrient-rich greens and sprouts and microgreens into your diet that doesn't need to be expensive. Most of us can grow a few herbs in pots. We can all grow sprouts on our bench. And microgreens take another step, but still they're pretty damn easy as well.
So welcome to the show, Megan. So excited to have you finally on our show. And I would love if you could talk a little bit how you got all into this realm of food and and health, and I guess having quite an enterprise around the whole topic, and then bringing that to the wider world also through books and all sorts of things. But how did you actually get into it?
I grew up on an organic farm, so I always grew up around food. Mum and Dad were market gardeners. And they used to grow organically, but they used to actually sell their produce as regular produce, conventional produce, because organics was not very, wasn't very popular at the time. Actually, as a kid, I did eat outside of the house lots of things that weren't good for me, and I ended up quite a sick child. So I've spent quite a good portion of my life unwell. And just know the power of food to heal and the power of food to harm. So that's sort of where I come from with it. And just as a kid, having all those foods that, desiring all these foods that were terribly bad for me, and wanting, with my company, trying to make food that is good for you really desirable as well. So it's really, that was the emphasis, is to no one mistake our company as a health food store cabinet of food. Like it needed to be just as appealing as the top place down the road, so that it wouldn't be, you don't come to our place because you just want something different. You just come to our to my cafe and eat our products because they're good. And then I went to university and did environmental science. And I really wanted to, with that, to help people. And I soon realized that I wasn't really going to make much of a difference with that. And throughout the thread of all my life, through the flats that I lived in, through the places I'd traveled and people I'd worked with, I was always influencing them with the food that I made. So eventually I was like, oh shit, okay, I need to go and do something with this. And so I went and worked for minimum wage as a chef. So I went and worked in the food industry, and then worked with normal food and got really sick again. And there was no really good places that I could go and work at that served whole foods. And I wanted to do a great job of what I was doing. I didn't want to go and work in somewhere that just made spinach muffins, and I wanted to learn culinary arts so that I could apply that to healthy food. So and then I got really sick, and through that process, and thought, oh gosh, I've really made a wrong turn here. I thought everything was pointing me in the direction of making food, and now I'm well and truly depressed and feeling like I epically failed. And eventually through that process, I didn't work for around 2 years. I was so unwell. And then I went to, I think it was Brian Clement's talk in London. And that was quite extreme. And I didn't go and do the protocols that they were recommending.
Which is, it's quite an extreme one. When you say that, you mean like it's a lot of green, what is it? Not green juices, but actually wheatgrass juice, all raw, that type of thing.
Yeah, all raw. And, they were even talking about the blender damaging the food. It was really like an extreme
Yeah.
extreme version of raw as well, I eventually started incorporating more of that, and I eventually started to get my energy back, and things started to look a lot better for me. And so Little Bird sort of comes out of that experience, and just my real desire, my original desire of trying to create food that made people feel good, feel nourished, and just inspire people to go and do that themselves at home.
I think when I found Little Bird, I thought you were a raw food restaurant. That's what it was to that, and a really good one, of course, and quite a few superfoods and really really quite unusual but really really healthy additions to what you normally see as ingredients. But would you call yourself still, or have you ever called yourself a raw food restaurant, or is it actually or do you don't have a term for what do you have for who you are?
Well, I think originally, like all the packaged products that we do are activated and dried for several days. So and sprouted as well. So we make sprouted buckwheat cereals and things. So all our products were always raw, and they still are. I think the market sort of changed quite a lot. A lot of competition came into the market. It's heavily labor intensive to do 100% raw in a commercial setting. And I think the best raw food in a way is the food you make at home. So the gourmet raw on a regular basis is very rich. And so what to me that I wanted to make food that made people feel good. And I didn't find that the gourmet raw stuff over and over and over again. It was more like a treat. If you were on a raw diet, it wasn't providing the health benefits that I, had received from the sort of raw food I'd been making at home.
Yeah. So, are you still sort of hooked on particular diets that you think are beneficial, or would you distance yourself from any diet and actually say, like, what I've created is something quite different, and I wouldn't call it a diet or anything like that? It's just something else.
Yeah, it's definitely not a diet, I think. Yeah, I call it like a lifestyle. So it's sort of a way of eating, a way of being. And I don't think there is necessarily one diet that's right or wrong. We're a plant-based restaurant, and I really believe in having a very low animal, input diet, and we have a purely plant-based diet. But I'm very wary of being too rigid and saying this is right and wrong, and everyone is so different, and everyone is at a different place along the way. And if I can help encourage people to have more plant-based meals and more whole foods meals and add raw meals into their diet, then that's a much better place to be than being rigid and kind of offensive to different groups of people.
Yeah. Megan, can you tell us a little bit about the observations that you have made when people actually go on, eat the way that your restaurant provides food, and then also what a junk food diet of that same style would do to people? Like, have you observed anything around that?
Yeah, yes, definitely. I think I think it's sort of obvious with the junk food diet, it just doesn't last, and then you can feel okay for a little while. You might have cut out some foods that weren't serving you, but essentially all of those highly processed foods will end up, unless you've got an incredible, there is the odd person that just they can put anything in their body and they seem to be okay. But generally, you'll put on weight, the skin will get worse, just the energy. It's like that, it dulls, that sort of food eventually dulls you. There's not enough vitality in it. And I feel like we sit in a middle ground where our food is really nourishing. It's with all the fermentation and sprouting things that we do, it's easy to digest, but also really satisfying. People tend to not, we have a lot of customers that have been coming for the entire time that we've been open on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
And, they really miss what we do when they go away. because there is this real focus from me to create meals that really satisfy people. So you're not hankering for something else in the afternoon. You're just
Hmm.
really satisfied because you've had a wide range of nutrients that are easy to digest, and it's really filling. And that's kind of what we specialize. And then we have all our amazing green smoothies and juices and stuff, so you can have that really bright, sort of vital raw food in there as well. Sort of it's kind of nice balance of things.
Hmm. If you don't mind, can you point out to me what would be a typical junk food, health food that you would think like long term it's not really great to live on?
I think the processed fake meats,
You're right.
really, yeah, really quite difficult to digest. It's a fun thing to have. So, if you're going out for a burger or, it's fun. Those things are fun. And to have as on an occasional thing, that it's not something you want to put in on a regular basis. I think you would find when you're having that kind of food on a regular basis, you would notice congestion. And a lot of those processed meats often get fried. So it's the fried foods and the fake meats. I think that people see them don't sort of equate what that might be doing to your body and how hard that might be to digest. And that's what I always come back to, is how hard is something to digest. Um,
Mm.
how long is it taking? Not that everything needs to be fast, otherwise you're
Yeah.
just addicted to a high. Um, but there is that sort of balance there, and something you notice between having activated nuts versus unactivated nuts, and everything just sits better. And it's for me, it's that process of getting to know your body and trialing foods and just really noticing what it does in your body energetically, and then sort of developing a diet that works for you from there. But
Yeah. I think, the relationship between emotions and food is so big. And I remember like when it was, quite high raw, like I would click with the people that were between 90 and 100% raw. Yeah, 98 was sort of like, the optimum, because it was always a little bit. And anything else below that, those are different people, talking about segmentation that you mentioned before, right? That's just crazy doing that. But I think what I found is that after a while, you just move away from these extremes and just find something that works for you. And it's often simple, right? So I think I can probably find something in almost any supermarket, get the sprouts, I don't know if they have organic seaweed, and you just put something really simple in there, and it somehow works. And I'm certainly not saint when it comes to eating. But I remember when I was raw foodist, I was thinking the Ministry of Health should really make this mandatory, that this is the way food should be, and everyone will be happy. And that leads me sort of like to a really important question, because if I look around, a lot of diseases seem to originate from lifestyle, which has a lot to do with what we put into our body and what we don't put into our body. And I think that responsibility of, the effect of getting that one wrong or right is so tremendous that I wonder, like, have you ever thought about how to, I don't know, how to fix it, or just how to get our society on track of actually using food as our medicine?
yeah, I mean, that's something that I think for me with the business, that's essentially what we wanted to do with the business, is provide, that's why we do the books, um, and even exist in the first place, so that we can, show people what that could look like. But I think for me, longer term, that's really what I want to tackle, is trying to get some policy around food introduced, and getting it's actually harder to get a message across now in some ways, because of the way people consume media. So everyone's consuming media that sort of actually reinforces their current viewpoint, whereas previously everyone would just watch the same TV show or read the same paper. So it is harder to sort of get a group message across. But in New Zealand, we're small, which is great, and actually relatively flexible, because we don't have really, very long traditions. So I do hold up hope for us as a country, that eventually through good governance, that could help get the message across around healthy eating. and what a whole foods diet can do for us as a nation, our productivity, reduced healthcare costs. I mean, the reduction in healthcare costs could be, transformative on a society in terms of funds available, um, and and the stress it creates on families having people sick, the cost of it, like it's just, it's such a big problem, and I think at a governance level there there has to be ways of gradually working towards reducing the cost of healthcare through promoting and perhaps subsidizing primary foods like fresh fruit and vegetables, because it is that is a massive barrier, the cost. There is the way we emotionally eat, which is obviously is a little more complicated, but then it isn't, for the average person, it is expensive, especially in a country like New Zealand that is an island. Our produce is quite expensive, so it
Yeah.
is a big barrier for people to easily have an abundance of that. Calorie for calorie, you can get a lot more calories out of processed foods, by so I don't know the ratio, but some very
Mm.
significantly than if you eat a whole foods diet. And just education around how people do that. I think there's a lot there that can be done, and more people sort of need to be tackling that and focusing at it, just purely from a financial perspective. Even just the burden of healthcare and the cost of healthcare is just, it's phenomenal. And if we could reduce that, and reduce the number of people in hospitals. I mean, the hospitals are overrun in most countries, and the doctors and nurses aren't able to do the job that they would like to do because they have to see so many people. So there's so many, I don't know, there's so many reasons to sort of really focus on that and reduce that. And that's something that I'd like to do eventually, is be a part of making that happen, because I think it's something that's quite overlooked of how big an impact it could make, and it will take time. It's not going to be something that happens overnight, but I do think in a country like New Zealand there's the potential for that to happen quicker than perhaps in other places, just because of our size.
I guess there's humans want freedom, and we want freedom in our countries. But if you think about it, there are certain reports that get released every year that would tell us the dirty dozen. Those are vegetables or whatever, food products that are known to have pesticides, herbicides, and the whole lot in it, that are obviously cancer causing, or not a lot of studies show that there's certainly something not so good that happens when you eat it. Why on earth would you just inform people and not say, this is actually toxic, this should not be allowed, therefore organic farming is the only way you can do when you grow these particular foods that obviously have too many residues to really, cause all sorts of problems? It just doesn't make sense to me. And I wonder, well, is it the lobby, is it the food lobby that really is the problem, and they're big enough to stop that, or what it is? But that's common sense. And the amount, the dollar amount that you put against the diseases that come from, ingesting all these different chemicals must be outweighing easily the benefit that we have of an industry running on that is really not sustainable for nature, for health, and for the whole planning side. I don't get it. It doesn't make much sense to me.
No, it doesn't make sense. And I mean, that's a really good point. And I grew up, my parents work in organics and were a part of the original certification body in New Zealand. So I come from, if I come from a church, it's the Church of Organics, and the importance of, not putting chemicals in the environment, and what that does to our waterways, and we can't get away from it once it's there, and how important it is to minimize that. I don't think in New Zealand it's too much to do with lobbies, especially around the vegetables and fruit, because I don't many of because we export a lot. Our high residue crops previously have had to come down, because for export, because countries wouldn't take them. But in some countries, obviously, it would be lobbies. But I think it just seems like a complicated, controversial topic, where that stuff's not really controversial anymore. So I think, that stuff is probably ripe for change in the near future.
Can you talk a little bit about the connection between, our consumption habits and climate change, and how you see that that can be actually fixed by how people, shop and consume?
I mean, climate change is such a massive issue, and it's not one. There's not one thing that's going to, one thing that's going to sort of change it all. But the way we consume so many different things, and if we can, especially around food, like it's just it's incredible to think of the billions of people, and if we changed the way we approached food, what a dramatic change that would make to climate change. And not, obviously reducing meat and dairy is a big part of that. There's the science for that, and especially people living in cities. That is one of the most powerful things people in cities can do to reduce their impact. But it's also, that's where processed foods too come in. You look at the amount of packaging and the amount of energy that's gone into producing those foods, and the amount of chemicals, etc., that goes into that. Over billions of people, there's a phenomenal amount of waste of chemicals that are going into the environment that don't need to otherwise.
So if we become really specific, and I think I asked you about two things. One is, what do you think in terms of environmental impact? What are the top three things that you would recommend people to take away and to try or to focus on? And then the same in terms of getting, having a more healthy diet. I know you touched on it, but your top three there as well. Would you mind sharing that?
Yeah, so I guess my top three on environmental is reducing or stopping your consumption of dairy products. That actually tends to have more of an environmental impact than meat. And also on our health as well. Is a large portion of the population does not, has an intolerance to dairy. It's very inflammatory, and it's just, especially if it's not organic. That would be probably one of that goes in both categories. Also, and reducing the consumption of meat obviously has a major impact. I mean, I grew up on a farm. I've been into factory farms as a kid, and small scale. It was definitely not like what you see on the movies, but you go into a factory with the chickens or the pigs, and it's horrendous. You really do not want to be associated with that through your diet. The energy of that is not good. So environmentally, and for me, environmentally, it may not be the big climate change one, but environmentally is choosing organic wherever you can. I really believe, like we talked about, the impact of agrochemicals on our land and on our health and on our environment is huge, and really quite misunderstood of how big that impact is. So for me, those are probably the sort of two major ones, would be, for environmental change. And then I just think just a general one of consuming a whole lot less of everything, and choosing compostable packaging, etc., is not always the best choice, because there's nowhere to process it, and then it ends up in the recycling, and then they have to throw out a whole lot of recycling because like tons and tons of recycling, because people are putting the compostable packaging into the recycling. So it's not that clean. It's still a very messy area around packaging, but reducing packaging, whatever it's made of, is a good thing, and just reducing your consumption. And then for health, I would say my top one is usually always greens. Add in green smoothies, add in green juice, just eat a lot of fresh food. It significantly changes how you feel, especially around greens, and a diverse range of greens. So not just eating one type of lettuce, eat herbs, eat wild greens, grow sprouts, grow microgreens. Like there's a lot of ways of making it easy to add in fresh, nutrient-rich greens and sprouts and microgreens into your diet that doesn't need to be expensive. Most of us can grow a few herbs in pots. We can all grow sprouts on our bench, and microgreens take another step, but still they're pretty damn easy as well. So and they make a big difference. They're like little powerhouses of nutrition, all of those microgreens and the sprouts. But there's just something about fresh green food. I mean, there's lots of information on why that's good, but it's more like a feeling. Don't worry too much about the science of why something's good. It's just feeling it and knowing that it's so good for you. So that, and then for me would be fermenting. Fermentation has made a big difference to my gut health and has made my gut so much more robust. And I notice it in other people as well. It makes it easier to digest all sorts of foods and get more nutrients out of your food by having a healthy gut. And it's quite a cheap, easy, and quite fun way to improve your health. There's so many things you can make yourself. I mean, it's so easy to make your own sauerkraut. And if you want to try making kefir or kombucha or any of those things, but really it's more on the vegetable ferments where you're going to get the best results. And then I guess the third one would just be just that thing. It's not a specific food, but coming back to whole foods and trying to eat food in its whole form as much as you can, and really getting in. And I mean, over in that whole in the health side of it, I think the most important thing is actually taking responsibility for your health and not reading something on a page and go, well, they said that's right, I'm feeling a bit sick. 2 weeks after continuously doing this, maybe that's not a detox effect. That is, that might be that your body doesn't tolerate tomatoes or whatever it might be. But it's really developing a relationship with yourself and getting to know your body and not, learn things. I mean, I love going out and learning new things and listening to things that sort of challenge my ideas of what looks healthy and what I may think is right. And it's great to challenge the ideas that you have and try new things, but own your health and own your life, and don't try and outsource that to a practitioner or to some pages in a book. Own that and make that your experience. And if you're working with a practitioner, work with them. Don't get them to do the work for you. It's sort of a two-way street.
Before we wrap up, I just have a couple of questions that I ask every guest. The first one is, what are your favorite 3 things to do at the moment? Like, let's rephrase it. What are the 3 things that get you out of bed every morning?
I mean, I love our business. That's definitely what gets me out of bed. I love what it does and what we do for people and the people that work for us. I mean, it really is, it's the hardest thing that I've ever done and probably will ever do. It's, we've been in business almost 10 years now, and it's certainly had lots of ups and downs, but it's the greatest learning experience I've ever had. And, certainly the customers and the staff that we have, and definitely it get me out of bed. It's, it's a great gift to be able to have that experience of running a business. It's a challenge and just such a gift.
Can you think about one fun thing that at the moment is sort of on your agenda that you look forward to? Just a fun thing, like.
I love going actually, my greatest joy at the moment is hoju cha. Hoju cha is roasted tea. So it's roasted tea leaves, and I found it in the powdered form. So hoju cha drinks. That's honestly so small but so exciting for me.
Is it this twig tea? Is that what it is?
Well, it's a little bit like twig tea. I think there's twigs and leaves that have been roasted, so it's a bit like bancha tea, but it's the twigs and the leaves. And I'm obsessed. It's my new favorite thing. You can use it in desserts and smoothies, and it makes a really delicious, like iced, with almond milk. It makes a delicious latte, etc. Great, just my new favorite thing. But swimming in the sea is probably actually one of my favorite things.
Last question. It's a bit of like a philosophical maybe. What do you think? Why do humans exist? Why do we have this experience? Why do we exist? But it's also really fundamental, right? Like, I do want to know that. And, I do need a concept to exist. Like, I really need to have that concept in my mind constantly to actually feel grounded enough. So I believe that everyone has something. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why we exist. I ask this question all the time. I think it's just to have an experience. I think it's never about achieving anything. I think the goals never matter. I think the goals are just a means to an experience. So I think it's just to experience emotion. In a way, I think that's a big part of the human experience, is to experience emotion within this body. And I think that's probably the uniqueness of being maybe human in comparison to other species, is that combination of the mental and the emotional, and it's sort of, and then the spiritual. But I think an animal has a spiritual experience. I think it's just the combination together, and just how emotional we are is just it's kind of phenomenal. So it's just I think it's really about having those experiences and experiencing emotion. And I mean, that's why I love the business so much, because it provides me with so much challenge, and it's constantly giving me that feedback. I can't get stuck in anything, because it really kicks you in the face if you're not dealing with any of your stuff. It becomes very apparent.
Yeah, the business is your dojo, eh? I see it that way too. Yeah, it's really real, really real.
It's very real, and it's very challenging. And we had about 85 staff at one stage, and we're down to around 50 at the moment. And just interacting with all those humans, having their experience as well. It's like the endless surprises. And endless challenges, which is and that's for me what I think my human experience is. It's just really being challenged and trying not to get lost in the emotional experience, and really trying to get across the beauty of what we do, and the joy that brings people. For me at the moment, it's really about finding joy in the everyday, and joy in the business, and seeing the joy that it brings other customers and the team, and that for me is probably something I'm focused on at the moment, and finding that's a great part of the human experience.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. I look forward to see you guys soon. Yeah, anytime. So I hope to have you back and see how you're doing in the future at one stage. But thanks for making time. I really think there was a lot for our listeners and to learn and see that angle, and obviously sharing your path. It was just it was really special. Thank you so much.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Sebastian.